So I just wanted to say welcome, find out where everyone's calling from, go on to our guest speaker, Ian Neville. This is a fascinating topic for us. And then we'll have the breakout rooms from 11:30 to 10 to 1. And then from 10 to 1 onward, we'll all come back and any feedback that you might have about the meeting. And here's the breakout rooms. We will name them so you'll be able to see what they are. Excuse me. I should mute my microphone when I do that. Room 1 is going to be Ian Neville, so he'll talk about his presentation. Room 2 is Tesla. Room 3 is battery care and replacement. And room 4 is using the Viva forum that we have on our new Wild Apricot website versus the mail-out list. We find that the forum is not well populated and people are still relying on the mail-out list. And rooms 5 and 6 can be whatever comes up. And having said that, let's just find out where everybody's from. So I know that we got John O'Brien. He's a new member, hasn't been with us before, so welcome, John. Anybody here from outside the province? No. Anybody here from outside the Lower Mainland? Yes, there is. I know there's lots of. Yeah, you got Richard Sharman spoke up there from Souk.
From Souk.
Yeah.
Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles. Who said that?
Richard.
Richard.
Yeah.
Richard, hey, welcome. Are you living in LA or just visiting there?
Well, I will be living here soon if I get my green card. That's what I've been trying to do.
Hey, nice to have you from all the way from LA. And there's
Thanks.
Jim Hanshaw that we see on the island, Glenn Gary on the island, and Jim Heinzen is here from the island. Anybody else?
Boyd here from the island too.
Okay.
Eric Jenkins.
Where from?
Bay.
Brentwood Bay.
Duncan, BC.
Duncan. Man, we've got all these island people outnumbering the Viva members. This is really good.
Tony Rotherham from Victoria.
Great, great. Thank
Heather
you.
Killington from Victoria.
Okay. Wow. Another Victoria person. Fantastic.
From Saanich.
Saanich. Great. Okay. Is there anybody here from the Lower Mainland? Put up your hands. Okay. There's 3 people from the Lower Mainland that I could see. Okay. So when we had our meetings in real life, basically we would all just kind of get together in one room and we could chat and there'd be little clusters of people. And then we would just, if you didn't like that conversation or you got bored or distracted, you'd move on to something else. So today we're trying to simulate that as much as possible. So we're going to have Ian Neville do his presentation. We will break out into breakout rooms. You'll be assigned a room randomly, but you can leave that at any time and reassign yourself to a breakout room, to whichever one you want. If you have any difficulties, one or two of us will stay here to help you reassign if you need it. And as a co-host, you have special powers. We'd like you to limit those so you just use it to move around to the breakout rooms. Otherwise, we could have just a heck of a lot of chaos. So, having said that...
hey, Ron, just before we...
Sure, yeah. Oh, you're muted there, Bruce.
Can you make me the Zoom host and I'll set up the breakout rooms while other things are going on, so we'll be ready for it when the time comes.
Actually, John is the host today.
Oh, John's the host? Okay.
But if John wants to hand it to you, that's fine.
Either way.
Either way, but what you need to do is send me your list of breakout rooms so I can name them.
Put it in the chat, Ron. Be great.
Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah.
So, John, we got a lot of people here today, which is excellent. There's a limit of 50 people who can be co-hosts, so some people will need to get assigned manually by the Zoom host.
Good to know, because I'm probably getting close to that. I've been adding co-hosts as we go along.
Okay, good.
Bruce, would you like to take over the host chair? I'm happy to pass it to you.
Oh, I think you're doing a great job. I can do it if you want, no problem.
All right, I'm making you the host. I'm going to sit in the background today.
Sounds good.
And I'll just, and Bruce, I'll get those to you while Neville is chatting with us, because Neville's time is limited, so I want to get him underway as quick as
Sure thing.
possible. Yeah. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Ian Neville, and I have just a little quick bio of Ian here. And Ian Neville is the lead author of the City of Vancouver's 2016 EV ecosystem strategy, and has been working in climate change mitigation and sustainability related fields for over 15 years. Ian has degrees in biology and environmental engineering, and has managed the City of Vancouver's public EV infrastructure since 2013. And so Ian Neville is going to be talking to us about curbside charging. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Ian and just let him proceed.
Great.
Go ahead, Ian.
Great, thank you. Hoping everyone can hear me. I think my mic is working today. So thanks for having me. Happy Saturday, everyone. If anyone can still tell the difference between days anyway. So yeah, in fact, we're going to talk a little bit more broadly than curbside charging. I'm going to introduce you to our new neighborhood charging strategy that we're working on. So I've got a quick slide deck here, and then we'll have time for some discussion after that. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and hopefully this will all work just fine. There we are. Share that. Get that going. Okay. I can get a couple of nodding heads that you guys are seeing something that looks like a slide. Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads. Great. So what we're working on now is really as part of our response to our climate emergency. In City of Vancouver, we declared a climate emergency in January 2019, and then last spring came back with kind of a preliminary action plan, and we're now starting to work through some of the different actions, and obviously electric vehicles have a big part to play there. So for this morning, I'm going to walk you through very quickly what we're doing, like how the climate emergency fits in terms of context, kind of the present state of charging in Vancouver, and then an introduction to the neighborhood charging strategy. So in actuality, the biggest emission source in Vancouver is actually burning natural gas for heat and hot water. I'm sorry, I've just got an 8-year-old upstairs with a really loud television on. I'm just going to go into that.
The joys of Zoom.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm back now. So as I was saying, biggest source of emissions in Vancouver is actually burning natural gas for heat and hot water. And that's about a little more than half the actual greenhouse gas emissions in Vancouver. But next up after that is diesel and gasoline burning. 38% of our emissions come from that. A big chunk of that comes from personal vehicles. So obviously that's something we do want to be able to target. Then the last little bits are electricity and waste, which are less addressed within our climate emergency response, and I won't get into it too much here today. So our plan is really kind of in 3 buckets: how we move, how we build and renovate, and then how we amplify our efforts. Amplifying our efforts is working with partners and generally reaching out to the community. Today, obviously, everyone's interested in how we move. You can see from my background here, we've got a few different ways in our household that we get around. But the focus really is on active transportation, on transit, and of course, electric vehicles. I should say more broadly, we do use the term zero emission vehicles, but virtually all of our actions are really focused on electrification. So I've got a flow chart for you. How we move, we've really broken down that zero emission vehicle piece has 3 pieces in of itself. One of them is a zero emission parking plan that we're working on, how to effectively push more support for zero emission vehicles, make it more convenient to drive a zero emission vehicle, which also balances out by making it less convenient to drive an ICE vehicle. We're also looking at providing infrastructure for passenger fleets and charging in buildings. When I say buildings, as many of you know, we already do have building code requirements in Vancouver for residential. In fact, as of 2 days ago, now every new residential parking spot in single-family homes and 2-family homes and multifamily homes, basically anything except visitor parking, has to have an EV charging circuit when it's built. However, we haven't done a ton with non-residential buildings, and so right now we're working on some plans to support, for example, people commuting in EVs, and how do we get more into office buildings and retail malls and so forth. But really today, what I'm talking about is sort of expanding our charging network. Even that has split into two. We have a passenger fleets piece, so that's really taxis and ride hailing, and those are some high mileage vehicles and how we support them. But then we also want to look at the neighborhoods, and this neighborhood charging strategy is really kind of the focus of what we're doing. And the reason for that is that by 2030, 50% of the kilometers in Vancouver are going to be driven by zero emission vehicles. It doesn't necessarily mean that half the vehicles on the road are going to be zero emission, because obviously if we can focus on the right ones, maybe it is just the half of the kilometers driven. So we want to figure out how all that fits together. As a lot of you, I'm sure, know, being able to charge at home is an important determinant in switching to an EV. It's probably one of the #1 things after price of the vehicle itself. But in Vancouver, 57% of people have no access to any charging at home. That's through a variety of reasons. Over 2/3 of our population live in multifamily buildings, which you all know are more challenging to get charging into if it's not there already. More than half of Vancouver are actually renters, so they don't have a lot of control over what happens on their property. And then, of course, there's the garage orphan problem, where folks who don't even have an off-street parking space necessarily. So we really want to look at a neighborhood strategy that kind of focuses on those folks who do not have foreseeable access to their own parking spot or charging space at home. I gave you sort of a quick rundown of how our population is. In terms of charging access itself, our building code has been extremely successful in getting new charging out there. We figured there's been about 50,000 new charging circuits built in Vancouver since 2014. And that's due not only to our requirements, but actually the builders have been over complying with what we make them do by nearly half. I think a lot of builders are now seeing this as a value add, which is excellent. And then, of course, we've recently upped our requirements. By the end of this year, we're also going to have a DC fast charging hub within a 10-minute drive of anywhere in Vancouver, which we hope will support a number of people who don't have access to home charging. But obviously, there are some challenges with relying solely on a DC fast charging network, which we can talk about in a little bit. We also know that there are over 300 public level 2s in Vancouver. Most of those are actually not city-owned. A lot of them are in shopping malls or hotels. They haven't necessarily been very equitably distributed, though. If you look at a map of plug share, there's tons in the downtown core. There's a lot along the Broadway corridor. But there are large portions of the east side of Vancouver and the west side that have almost no charging at all. On the downside, we ran a curbside charging pilot for a couple of years that ended last summer, and where we were licensing people to be able to put an outlet on their curb connected to their home electrical panel. But for a variety of reasons, it really didn't have a lot of uptake. I think cost was a major barrier, but also we can't guarantee anyone a parking spot in front of their house. So there was no way to guarantee that they would actually be able to access that thing that they'd put in. There are some equity implications with our current charging setup. Again, forcing someone to rely on a DC fast charging network is more expensive. It's not necessarily convenient for everyone to rely on public charging. So there's definitely cost side and convenience that will keep people out of the EV charging space. And we really haven't come up with a great solution for basement suites, for garage orphans. As I said, the curbside charging pilot didn't go well. And so for those folks who kind of don't have reliable parking, we really need to come up with something new. And you can see just from the map in the background here, these little sort of dark blue areas, these are areas throughout Vancouver where there's actually no off-street parking at all. So these are people who are completely reliant on street parking. So we figured there's maybe 3,000 homes in Vancouver that are in this situation, and that's not even looking at multifamily. So it is a fairly large problem. So our objectives in this neighborhood charging strategy, social inclusion, which is really just another phrase for social equity, really looking at how we can support people who are middle and lower income. We want charging to be accessible in residential neighborhoods, as I said, for people who don't have a foreseeable option for home parking or charging. And when we say accessible, it's generally meaning reliable access to it, but as well, we are trying to put more of a lens on how to actually look at different abilities and actual people who have accessibility challenges with a lot of the infrastructure we have now. We want to maximize the number of vehicles that we can charge, and we want it to be convenient so that it does encourage people to switch from an ICE to an EV. We need to identify what the scale is. This charging strategy, we don't really know what the ceiling is. What do we need to do as far as number of charging points in order to get to that 50% vehicle kilometers traveled by 2030? And where we can, we want to enable it to be co-located with other electrification projects. For example, our Mobi bike share system is going to be going to electric bikes as well. So how can we kind of share infrastructure there where it works? Again, we've got a few more buckets here. We like our buckets in Vancouver. So there's three kind of main ways that we're looking at accomplishing this right now. And one of the things I want to hear from folks today is, do these seem reasonable, but also what have we missed? But the first one is around near home charging. So utilizing underutilized parking areas, things like schools or places of worship that we may be able to put in charging infrastructure on to support people living in a neighborhood. Low power charging. We want to try out some light pole charging, allowing extension cord ramps for people to run a level 1 cord across their sidewalk safely. And then looking at new fee structures that are perhaps more focused on energy use, but probably also have limitations on who can access certain infrastructure. Really focusing again on longer term parking. So this near home charging I mentioned, you can see here is the church in my neighborhood, and this is what the parking lot usually looks like. It's empty. So they're frequently unused most days of the week or on certain days or at night. Same thing with a lot of school parking lots. They tend not to be used on weekends. They tend not to be used overnight. These are institutional locations that tend to be found in most neighborhoods across the city. And often the buildings can support a small number of level 1 outlets or possibly like an energy managed level 2 solution. But again, we're looking at people who are going to be parking there for overnight at least. So there isn't really a need for a lot of power. The goal here is really to get as many people charging as possible. For low power charging, the first one is allowing for cord covers. So the one you see here in this picture is probably a little more aggressive than what we would be allowing. This is actually something in Europe where someone's actually got like a level 2 charging cable there. We're really going to be following Seattle's lead on this. So Seattle has recently provided guidance on allowing for like a level 1 extension cord. So no greater than a 1/2 inch, which allows for a much smaller mat, a much lower ramp. Less of a barrier for folks in wheelchairs or using strollers or who have other mobility issues. But again, something that can be safe to make sure that we are providing guidance. We know that people are doing things like this anyway, so we would like to make sure that it's done safely. And obviously these would only be in place when someone is actually charging. We also want to look at light pole charging. We are doing a retrofit of all of our street light poles to LEDs over the next couple of years, which is going to free up some electrical capacity. And so looking at opportunities to add charging sockets in some way to those light poles. We think in many locations we can add several outlets to a service panel. Maybe options for either level 2 or level 1 charging. We also want to try some experiments with smart cables, so a removable cable that someone would carry with them that has a meter in it, as opposed to having fixed cables like on a normal charging station. This is something that's being, I've lost my presentation. Hold on. What happened there? Okay. So just basically looking at how we can support light pole charging. That's about it. One second here. Sorry, folks. Okay. Sorry, my Zoom seems to have crashed here. Are you folks still hearing me? Can I get a nod that folks are still hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay. So the other thing we want to look at is new fee structures. So switching really from a time-based to an energy-based fee, having longer stays, as I mentioned, focusing on allowing people who are reliant on this to not be stuck into a higher price structure, which may mean having some situations where we're geofencing or having a set of people who are signed up to be able to use a charging location. Obviously, this has metering requirements.
Your presentation, yeah, I don't see your presentation. Does everybody else see it?
Oh, hold on. Let me try that again. I think.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Oh, you are?
Yep.
I'm not.
Oh, weirdly, I'm not seeing it.
Okay. Let me. I'll
Lots
try
of thumbs down
resharing.
here.
Okay.
Yeah, try resharing.
I'll try resharing here.
Not here either.
Have we got anyone?
Got it.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
it.
You're back. You're back now.
Okay, sure. I don't know what happened there. It seemed to stop sharing for a couple of minutes. Did folks see this one? When did I lose you? Did you see?
That was the last one.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So we didn't miss too much then. I think I was just talking about light pole charging. I think it went wonky just at the end of that. So yeah, I mean, there's not much to see on the slide, but basically our goal here with new fees is to enable something that's more equitable, something that's really energy based, so that people aren't necessarily encouraged to turn over. We don't want people to feel that they, need to come out in their pajamas at 3 in the morning and move their car because the rates aren't working for them. And we really don't want to have to encourage people to drive to charge their cars. So that's really how we want to look at our fees for this. But as I said, it may require some creative thinking in terms of making sure that people are able to access it who need it. And certainly if we go to an outlet model, fees and subscriptions will need to be considered very carefully so that we don't have people just using it for example, running their lawnmower or setting up a bar fridge on their lawn or whatever. I live in East Van, so you never know what might happen. So our timeline for what we're doing right now is we're engaging both internally and then with folks like yourselves through into early summer. And as well, we're kind of going to be launching a broader public engagement. This timeline has obviously been set off a little bit by all the COVID restrictions, but the idea is to continue moving along so that we can take our plan and our action plan around climate emergency generally to council in November. So for today, I have a few discussion questions that we can go over, and then of course folks are more than welcome to bring up other issues if you'd like. Maybe what I will do is see if I can copy and paste these into the chat box, and then I can stop sharing my screen and we can go back to the grid view for everyone. So stay tuned for that, and if maybe I will run through the questions. I'm sorry. So first of all, the tactics that we talked about, do these make sense to you? How could they be most effective? Are there things that you've seen in our presentation that look like maybe won't work or need some specific thinking? Are there actions that can support people again in this context of charging near home? Is there anything we've missed on how we can support that? Any thoughts on who we might be able to partner with would be great. And similarly, who else needs to be in the room for the conversation? And as well, we're starting to think really about post-pandemic recovery. So, are there things that are ripe for infrastructure dollars? Are there ways that we can possibly use the closures for the pandemic to support EVs? People are enjoying more air quality now, so more improved air quality now. So obviously, some nod to more EVs might be helpful. We're just starting to think about what's newly possible in this space. So from there, I will stop sharing and I'll move these questions into the chat. And then, I'm happy to take questions or comments from folks.
I just wanted to start by commenting that at last we have an unequivocal, undeniable connection between the reduction of transportation, ICE vehicles on the road, and an immediately improved air quality. And I hope that this will give the political forces the courage to bring in stronger legislation than they might have done before because they were facing the naysayers and the jury's out on that. Not everybody is agreeing.
With that, Peter, you get the last word on that because we're going to go into breakout rooms. But that's an excellent comment and a good one to push us on. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to you, Bruce. Do you want to just throw everybody into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, a little bit of information about that. So I've set up the breakout rooms and they all have names, the ones that Ron talked about earlier. When I press a button here, everyone will receive an invitation. It'll pop up on your screen, so you need to accept that to go to the room. Once you're in the room, it may not be the room that you particularly want to be in. Move your mouse around, go to the bottom of the screen, and there should be a button there called Breakout Rooms. If you click that, you should see all the breakout rooms and you can choose the one you want to go to. if you have any problems, just click the thing that says go back to the main room or leave the breakout room, something like that. And you'll come back into the main room and I'll be here and I'll help you get sorted out. So unless there's any questions about that, I will open all the rooms. The invitations will start flying out and people can accept and start organizing themselves into the rooms. Have fun.
Good luck to everybody.
Again, for us short-term memory people.
Sorry, say one more time.
Can you outline what rooms or what subject again?
The titles of the rooms will show up in the list when you press the breakout room button. You'll see the titles there. Any other questions? Okay, here we go.
Here we go. Fingers crossed.
I didn't see a list, Bruce.
You didn't see the list when you go click on breakout room?
No, I just invited to leave it.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so I'm stuck in Tesla breakout room and I want to go to the Ian Neville room, please.
Okay.
I'm back with you, Bruce, in the
Yeah,
main room.
I understand. I'll get you, I'm moving you over now to Ian Neville. There you go.
Thank you.
Bruce, it's Giles Stevenson here. I'd like to go to the Tesla room, please.
Sure thing. I guess the self-organizing thing isn't working, is it? Hang on. I'm looking for Giles. Did you get assigned to a room, Giles, already?
I went to the Ian Neville room and I've left that and come back to the main screen.
Oh, here you are. Okay. Move to... Sorry, you wanted to go to Tesla?
Yes, please.
There you go.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, Bruce, I got assigned to the...
Where do you want to go, Donovan?
Number one, and I couldn't quite figure out how, when I went to leave it, I didn't...
Okay, yeah, I think the thing I was trying with wasn't working all that well, but
Oh,
anyway.
Thank you.
And Bruce, Matt here. I'm wondering if I could get to the number one room as well. I got to do the recording for the curbside.
Yeah, gotcha. What room did you get to? Oh, there you are. Whoops. Okay. Anybody else want to get reassigned?
Yes, to the...
Sure, yeah.
I'm going to actually jump to number 6 because I'll probably forget it. I'm an old guy. And that is that certainly with the pandemic and so on, not only is there a drop in transit ridership, but what do you think the potential is that there'll be a permanent drop in transit ridership with respect to concerns about the virus having 2 or 3 waves, and that people will actually be looking ways of gravitating back towards, well, I know we'd all like to see them on bicycles, but they'll be gravitating towards cars, will they not? What do you think?
I mean, I definitely think it's a risk. I mean, we are going to have to sort of take measures to encourage people back on transit. And I think for a while, people are going to be uncomfortable with it. And certainly, you know, the social distancing rules that are in place need to stay in place. The fact is that we need to move people back to transit as much as we can. Anyway, I mean, from a geometry perspective, we just can't fit enough people in single occupant vehicle cars in Vancouver and have things move around. So, you know, things like mobility pricing will certainly be part of it. I suspect that some of the road closures we've seen in Vancouver and other municipalities, a lot of those are probably not going to go away. You know, I think people are getting used to liking having walkable neighborhoods, but mobility pricing is the other piece I think that we want to see come in, to have people really be able to make their journey choice rationally. And, you know, there's a lot of people who frankly can't really afford to be driving and parking all the time and might be doing it out of necessity, but you know, transit is obviously a more viable option for a large number of people. But
just to follow on to that,
sure.
You also mentioned you were looking, and I think you made a great point about, is there an opportunity that certainly during that period of time, or maybe people are switching back to cars for a little while, or even if it's temporary, can you think there's ways of leveraging that on your comment about, well, we want them to get electric cars?
Mm-hmm.
You think there's any opportunities there?
Well, I think
I'm going to drive again, drive an electric car.
well, I mean, that is a big chunk of it. And certainly things like the zero emission parking plan will help push people that way. As far as the cultural side of it, I think the big concern is that we want to make sure that, I mean, there's a pro and a con right now. There's a ton of vehicle supply out there, both electric and non-electric, because no one's buying vehicles, and there's thousands of them stacked up at the Port of Vancouver. And at some point, the dealers are going to need to sell those because it's costing them money. So hopefully what we'll see is some real price reductions on EVs in particular that will encourage people to buy them when they are back into a buying place, but we have to wait for the economic recovery to start there. So on that side, I mean, people can at least get them for the first time in a long time, whereas actually you could probably walk into a dealership and buy an EV simply because there's tons of them sitting around. Beyond that, we are working with groups like Moto to get more EVs in their fleet, and the hope is that will often offer a bit of a test drive opportunity for people who get excited about EVs. And they're certainly keen on continuing that as much as they can through this crisis.
So I live out here in North Vancouver in Deep Cove, and one of the things that's happened to us is my wife and I are walking about 2.5 hours a day, hour and a half in the morning, an hour at night. We're not driving our electric cars. We have 2 of them. We're not driving them very often. We're doing maybe once a week trips. Every day we walk by the bus shelter that's out here. There's a 211 and a 212, and those buses are empty, and they have been empty for every day that we've been there. And the drivers are driving empty buses in and out of Deep Cove every day, every particular time they're doing it. So people are getting to ride buses for free at this point in time, and nobody's doing it. So what's going to happen when then these are diesel buses, and what's going to happen when we start moving back into the situation? Hopefully people are going to start looking at electric cars, but the car dealers I've been talking to, nobody's coming in to talk to them. They're all down to maybe 1 or 2 sales reps. They'd be more than happy for you to come in to look at a car right now. Anybody I'm talking to, I'm saying to them, this is the ideal time for you to contact a dealer, having done your research on the internet, and start going in and doing test drives, because they're desperately wanting to sell a vehicle to you. So far, what's happened in the United States, General Motors is giving preferential pricing on Chevrolet Bolt EVs. None of that is happening with GM Canada. So that's one of the challenges we've got. The other thing I've heard is that there's massive amounts of ICE cars sitting in storage yards in the Lower Mainland doing nothing. And the more expensive ICE cars are absolutely not moving at all. However, in the month of March, I do know for a fact that Tesla delivered 50 Model 3s on a Saturday and another 50 Model 3s on a Sunday. So the people that are taking the market by storm are people that can supply cars, and Tesla was able to supply them up until March 23rd in huge volumes, and that's what's been happening.
No, those are good points. I wasn't aware of those sales numbers, but that is, I mean, that's great. I mean, I think actually you raise a good point with the ICE vehicles sitting in storage too, is that there's a risk that those get a lot cheaper too, which definitely makes it a lot easier for for people to stay in that. And with gas prices being a little bit lower, I mean, EVs are still, electricity is still a quarter of the price of gasoline, but I don't think many people, if you're that price conscious that you're looking at fuel prices to make your purchase decision, probably right now you're not making a purchase, simply because it's a lot to invest in when things are so uncertain. You raise a good point, actually, Bruce, about transit, and that's one that I'm, we're seeing a lot of transit. Sorry, what was that? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard a question.
Everything seems to be hung up more or less.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're struggling with funding even the most basic things, but hopefully, I mean, maybe there's an opportunity down the road for, as we see more funds being poured into keeping transit afloat, that somehow turns into a zero emission plan. But right now, I think it's really just keeping it running. And I don't think I'm not sure I see an opportunity there. So I would be interested to hear from someone else. If they have one.
Well, the other interesting thing, of course, is we've lost Car2Go. We've lost Zipcar. Moto and Evo are the only 2 people still in play. The BC Automobile Association product Evo, is a park it anywhere in the city and anybody takes it from there. Moto is point to point. So Moto did try electric cars for a while. They had some Nissan Leafs, 2012 Nissan Leafs, which were, going from a point to point. And I still remember seeing on the way back from Chilliwack once, of all things, a Nissan Leaf that was a Moto driving back from Chilliwack, admittedly driving 20 kilometers an hour under the speed limit, so it would get back from Chilliwack to Vancouver, because they just didn't have the range. But now that we're starting to see these cars with range, and their point-to-point model where they get a charging station like Cole Harbour downtown, they charge the car and can go out 350 to 400 kilometers someplace and back, that's going to make a lot of sense. Of course, the big cost there is the big thing is that, and we all know that a Car2Go tried electric smarts for a while and it was a disaster. The cars didn't charge fast enough and they were left uncharged because people didn't know how they work. So
Okay,
I'm seeing more of a switch for people going from large transportation like a bus to start looking at things. And if we can incent people to get into electric cars or electric car sharing, I think that's going to keep the atmosphere clean the way it is right now, which is beautiful. Off.
Well, sorry, John,
you
you
have
had
some
some-
comments? We've got a couple other people that want to have some questions.
I want Ian to answer my question, John. Let Ian answer my question, please.
I'll definitely respond to the car share thing. So Moto is actually doing a fair bit on that now. You're right, there was a bit of a lull. Their plan is to actually they were going to buy 25 EVs for Vancouver this year. They've got the first 5 in place. Obviously, their purchasing is a little bit slowed down by the fact that their utilization has gone down. But they are still planning, if things pick up by the end of the year, to purchase a bunch more. Some of the barriers actually on the city, we're trying to work out a financial plan to support them with infrastructure. We don't have a ton of extra budget to fully subsidize them, so we're trying to roll it into other plans. But they're definitely still interested in the EV space, and the 5 that they've had in place since December they've been getting tons of use. They've got some Konas, and I believe Kia Souls are the other ones, but they're definitely seeing, like, they're getting more heavily used in the non-EVs, which I think is a really good sign. And the other thing with Moto is in March, their utilization fell off a cliff with the pandemic. However, it seems like it's creeping back up again. They're certainly not seeing the long distance trips yet, but what I'm hearing is that they are seeing a lot more regular users in town, people doing their weekly grocery run or whatever, but they're seeing that use, especially from people who it's their only access to cars is Moto, and they don't own a personal vehicle. Those people are starting to tick up their use again as sort of things become more settled and comfortable. So yeah, cautiously optimistic on that. And then Evo, we don't have a plan for them yet, but they are getting more interested in the EV space as well. They are, I think, right now scrambling to fill the hole that Car2Go left, and so they're really focused on member service right now, and obviously again their utilization's taken a hit. So but they have signaled that they would like to look at EV solutions as well.
Okay, the next question is coming from Simon and then Jacques.
Hey, thanks. It's great to talk to someone from the city. I've been emailing a little bit of sort of around this. My main interest here is actually as a micromobility advocate. So I know that's probably a little bit left of center for a Tesla group, although I do own a Tesla. But for City of Vancouver, I live in the middle of the City of Vancouver. I live in Riley Park. And I've been riding an electric skateboard to work for 3 years now. And I've clocked up like 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers on it. Wow. And what I like about the personal electric vehicles, the ridables, as they get given various names, is they're very energy efficient. They're 10 times more energy efficient than a car is. I do something like 20 watt hours per mile compared to 200 watt hours per mile in a car. And I can just pick it up and walk into a building. So there's no need for parking. There's no need for infrastructure. And it can't be stolen. I've had electric bikes and they've been taken. And that's kind of what the skateboard is so appealing to me, is that I can just tuck it under my arm and you're going to have to fight me for it. So that's kind of one piece of that. And I think that you're right to sort of caution against a push to use the COVID opportunity to push people to electric cars, because cars still have lots of issues in cities. Congestion is still congestion. There is still blunt trauma risk, even if the air quality goes up, which is great. So it's not a negative thing. It's definitely a win over a gasoline vehicle, but it does also still present challenges in compact cities like Vancouver, where mobility solutions, micro-mobility solutions there's only a few places in the world, New York, San Francisco, London, and I think Vancouver, where it makes sense, and we have reasonably the weather for it. So that's that. Thank you for listening. We can have that discussion another time. Back to the points around electric car charging that you proposed. I have a bold one for you. What if you provided the electricity for free? And what if you said you wanted to get to 50% of kilometers driven? I'd be curious if you have a number for that. How many kilometers driven is 100% and what's half of that? And then if you went on an average consumption of 160 watt hours per kilometer, how many gigawatt hours is that of electricity that you would have to buy? What's the cost of that for a year? And is that something that Vancouver as a city could do as a world-leading initiative, where you simply just blanketly say, if you drive an EV, you don't have to pay for fuel if you live in Vancouver? Something sort of crazy like that. And the reasons that I mention that is because the cost of infrastructure for billing, having to provide equipment that can measure electricity, that can bill a person, that can have their credit card details, that all of that complexity adds a barrier, it adds faff. You're always, you're playing around with cards, or you've got some app or some code that you have to type in, and it just makes it more complicated than it needs to be. And then the cost of the equipment, how many kilometers for free would you give before the cost of the equipment, whether you push it onto the consumer and then it becomes another barrier of entry for people who are low income, or you push it onto the city and then the project becomes enormously expensive. So how many kilometers a year do Vancouverites drive?
Well, I don't have what that VKT number is yet. That's a good point. I mean, we're actually right now trying to come down to like, how do we measure that, what that 50% number is? And is it, 50% of now, or, if we shift a whole bunch of people over to walking, cycling, and transit, are we measuring just the remaining vehicles, or, what's our baseline? So how to measure it and what that number is, we're still kind of coming to grips with. So sorry, I can't answer that one yet. But one of the things I will say about free charging is that we have done that experiment, and we did have free charging from 2012 or 2011, whenever our first charging stations went in, through till about 2017, and it was, I think, really important for early stimulus to the market. But to your point on micromobility, providing free fuel for driving incentivizes driving, and that's not really what we want to do. And the other challenge is that we find that there's a lot of misuse of the infrastructure itself. We found that with no price, we were having issues with conflict and actual fistfights at charging stations about like, who should be there? You've been here too long. You have a plug-in hybrid and I have a battery electric. I should be able to get here first because I don't have a backup. And we found that people were staying 2 to 3 times longer than they needed to get fully charged. They were sitting on the infrastructure. The average charging session was like 2 hours and 45 minutes, and the average charging amount was 10 kilowatt hours.
Right.
So
then if you're charging for energy, you're not necessarily solving the problem of someone sitting on it. Because
exactly.
Once the charge is finished, they still won't.
Exactly. So we have to manage that space. One of our goals is to keep it cheaper than fossil fuels and as cheap as possible. And so one of the things we do with our pricing is that we actually actively look at each site on a quarterly basis, and we kind of have like a utilization band. And we say, if it's over this amount, then we're going to raise the price because people are still sitting there too much. But if utilization drops below, say, 40% during the day, we'll actually drop the price. And we've had a few locations like Mount Pleasant Community Center that's gone back to free charging because paying for parking was enough of a barrier. And we do that site by site because demand does change site by site. But
so I use Riley Park a lot, where it's $1 an hour for 6 kilowatts, and it's perfect because it's about what BC Hydro would cost, and it seems to keep the stations mainly moving.
And that's exactly what we want to have, is kind of keep that structure there. We may have to rethink how we do DC fast charging at some point as those stations see higher utilization, just because the variation in how different vehicles are, what they get is different. But our main goal is to keep it cheaper than fossil fuels and really as cheap as possible. But we do have to manage that public space. And so I can't see us ever going back to free. And the other thing is, again, like back to the walk, cycling, transit hierarchy overdriving, is that I was told many years ago by our head of engineering, we want to incentivize electric cars, but we do not want to incentivize driving. And so,
I got a skateboard you can borrow.
Exactly. Well, and that's definitely higher on that that sort of hierarchy for us is making sure that people are doing that. And if they, we just can't have people driving for free. And the other thing is that people will abandon their home charging stations and park in the public realm because it's free. And then again, it's not available to the people who actually need to rely on it. So free charging is probably not something you will see in Vancouver again.
That assumes a limited supply of chargers, whereas I think my idea is that it's ubiquitous. It's on every lamppost.
Well, and I think our price could come down as we add more, and certainly the goal is to get more out there. We're not just, if utilization keeps going up, we don't just keep jacking up the price because we haven't put enough charging stations. I mean, the idea is to get more and more charging out there. And so, like you said, lampposts is a great example of how we want to make it more ubiquitous. So yeah, if there are other ways that can be simpler, I would love to see a supply of more 600 volt input charging stations, so I don't need to buy a transformer every time I want to put one on the curb. Because right now that's the big challenge with blanketing a city in, for example, level 2, is that we have to buy a transformer and bring it down from the hydro voltage first. And so that adds, 20, 25 grand to the cost of a level 2 charger. So if we can find less expensive opportunities to put that kind of infrastructure in, we would like to get a lot more out there and probably again at the lower power for these neighborhood type settings.
Okay, the next question is from Jacques and then Don Chandler.
My question was this. You mentioned in the presentation the possibility of using unused parking lots, for example, from the schools. Mm-hmm. Have you already discussed with the school board whether or not it's possible to have some kind of a blanket agreement to do this with the schools?
They actually do have some interest in it. I don't know that we could go with a blanket agreement just because different schools are using their parking differently. Some of them are becoming easy park lots and they have their own plans for how they want to sort of monetize their lots. But so we're working with them on the business model right now. I think that they have right now we're not quite on the same page as far as how we would approach it. But there's definitely interest. They see those parking lots as a potential revenue generator and they're definitely keen to get charging in because they've got, for example, teachers who want to drive EVs. And if we can supply something that can support the public at night and maybe provide workplace charging in the daytime, that would be great because the school board doesn't have money for that infrastructure. So if the city can help subsidize that, I think that they are interested.
I was going to say, because the school board has, obviously there's a provincial angle to this. Does the province have to be on board for this or is the local school board enough?
It seems, so far the school board, I think that those operations are local decisions. They seem to be keen to do it and haven't suggested that they need to go for other authorization. So, I think I'd like to find some pilot kind of beachhead locations to start with, some neighborhoods that have like more ideal parking lots, especially in places where we don't have any other public charging, and see how it works out and go from there. But yeah, there's definitely interest from the school board.
Thank you.
No problem.
Next question from Don.
Yeah, just a comment actually back to Simon's question that Ian didn't have the answer for. Vehicle kilometer traveled for the city of Vancouver is 22 kilometers and the average energy consumed is 6.63 kilometers, probably 6.63 kilowatt hours per day. That's based on an average EPA average of 213 watt hours a kilometer, which scales up to 256 watt hours a kilometer when you take into account things like weather and speed of driving and elevation, those different kinds of things. And also the efficiency of charging, where there's losses in the wires, losses in the charger, losses in shared systems of timing. At the 90th percentile, you're up around 19, I think it is, as a peak. So if you're on a dedicated circuit, you really need to be able to supply closer to, if I can find my right line in the formula, is 15 kilowatt hours, or on average over the evening. So I've been doing a lot of modeling on performance and what's actually needed. With 22 kilometers, you can share, I think it is up to about 7 cars on a circuit. On a 40 amp circuit, no, up to 12 cars on a 40 amp circuit, if it's well managed, to still get away with it and get everybody charged by morning. So
22 kilowatts per Vancouverite per day.
Say again?
22 kilometers per Vancouverite per day.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's level 1 charging. That's just a 110 socket. You could do a 110 socket per lamp post.
Yeah, that's true for half the population. That's an average.
Right.
So, but when you say look at the distribution of the population, and it's a binomial distribution skewed to the left, some people drive up to 90 kilometers a day in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And I've taken all of this into a big performance model to say how much wire do we need to put into a condominium, and how big of a transformer.
And that model is actually probably what we would follow for doing things like the lamppost charging, for example, is trying to meet that like 12 kilowatt hours over 8 hour standard that we use for new multifamily. And we found that we could do it, like our feasibility study has shown that like an energy managed level 2 solution on a lamp pole will probably work, and then someone gets a little bit more power if they're the only one plugged into that lamp pole. But we can probably support multiple charging stations per service panel in most locations, and then there's sort of a bunch of lights per service panel. So we're looking at probably 1 to 2 sockets per light pole in some locations, which and could be run at, as I said, an energy managed level 2 or just level 1, and we think that could get a fair ways there once we do our LED retrofit.
Yeah, the 12 hour per kilowatt hour, that was based on a study for Richmond, and that assumed for sharing on 4 on a circuit.
Mm-hmm.
If you share more on a circuit, you can reduce that. And that's actually also a very high estimate. We've done a lot more refinement in the modeling since then. Like I say, you can share in Vancouver up to 12 on a 40 amp circuit, which is much less. But you can't do that. You can't just translate that. It's not linear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have 2 questions up. First one's from Jim, and then next from Colin.
Ian, Vancouver has been very supportive of Modo.
Yes.
What are your feelings about Modo now adding hydrogen cars to their fleet when the hydrogen comes from natural gas? Is that really helping to lower GHGs?
Well, I don't have a strong opinion on it. I mean, we're certainly not specifically supporting the hydrogen move on that. I think in order to, I don't really move on it one way or the other. We don't do things specifically to support the hydrogen program. We would like to see more renewable hydrogen in the system, and hopefully the low carbon fuel regulations will start pushing for a better supply of renewable hydrogen that's coming from waste products as opposed to a natural gas supply. To be honest, I don't have a ton to say on hydrogen. It's not my space. So we do like the air quality benefits, obviously, of having hydrogen fuel vehicles in Vancouver. But you're right, from a GHG perspective, the benefit is questionable. And I'm not really qualified to go much beyond that. Let me put it that way. Sorry for the non-answer.
No worries. Thank you.
Next question, Colin, and then there was 2 Jims. So Colin next, Jim Heinsohn, then Don Scott.
Hi everyone. This is my first meeting. I've recently got become a first-time EV owner, and I live in a multi-unit residential building with 17 townhouses and a shared parkade. We have 2 EVs down there already, and then mine has recently been added, and currently I'm just sharing a spot next to one of the existing EVs. But we have assigned parking, and we have pretty limited power. There's only 2 40 amp circuits to share throughout the garage, and I'm on the strata, and I'm trying to come up with like a sane policy that'll make it easy for the next few, or I mean, ideally all future EV owners in the complex. And I'm wondering if you guys all seem very knowledgeable and smart, and I'm wondering if anybody has any resources on strategies for doing that, and different options that we can look at and propose to.
Colin, can you you can email me after the meeting, because I was on Strata when I had dealt with that as well. So
Okay.
maybe I can give you some advice on that.
Yeah, like it just seems incredibly complicated, and for me at least, I'm the third one, and and then at a certain point, like once we are unable to load share amongst the two existing circuits, it could get really expensive. And like, should we think about that now rather than later and stuff like that? So yeah, I'd be.
Another good, more general resource you can try calling is Plug-in BC. They have like their EV advisor program that can help people walk through that. And there are some strategies there. I know a good strata lawyer who's got some background in this if anyone's interested, but
yeah.
I think that the main point is very good planning, and that's not part of the BC the website. It's how do you actually deal with the strata council. I can give you some advice there.
Okay. Good point. Thanks, Jeff. Sorry, Ian, can you give me the name of that lawyer?
Sure. Her name is Jennifer Neville.
Jennifer Neville.
Good.
No family relation.
Something you might also want, if I can interject for a second, something you might want to look at. Jim Henson, I think on the Victoria EV Club's website, there's a presentation. We've had a couple of presentations from an engineer here on dealing with strata. Very comprehensive. He's been working with this a lot. And if you go to that website, then Jim Henshaw, you can confirm whether it's there or not, but you'll be able to see the presentation. It goes through it very, very well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Can I interject here? Ian, I think you needed to leave at noon, and it's just 12:02 now. Did you want to wrap this up? And come
sure,
back
yeah. Why don't we give it, like, I've got another 5 minutes. I think I can hang on the line. So if folks have, like, last-minute questions or comments, I'm happy to take them now. And if not, I sent my email around, so folks are welcome to email me, and I can respond back that way. My email's in the chat box. So,
Ian, I want to congratulate you on your great work. There's some ideas in your presentation that I had never really paid a lot of attention to, like the church thing, and that's a great idea. And I wonder if the City of Vancouver might be supportive of others' efforts to press BC Hydro to use some of the extra money they're getting from EV overnight charging that they never had before, and pump that back into some infrastructure investments to address things like your transformer requirements on the streets and things like that. You think Vancouver might support something like that?
We would definitely support something like that. And we are definitely supportive of trying to help Hydro get more into kind of the make-ready space in general. Like, they're pretty focused on their own DC fast charging network. And where we would really like to get support from them is sort of providing that make-ready infrastructure, so it's easier for us to put in level 2 on the street and things like that. So, and that's an area where I do think that they don't necessarily have a good funding line of sight to do. So, yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick follow-on to that. I want to echo your concerns about free charging. I can verify here that this free charging at the DC Hydro infrastructure means that all these condo owners, and I know all 12 people in my building, they run out to the free chargers, and we want them to put their money on getting our infrastructure in the building. So I hope that Vancouver would be supportive of getting Hydro to finally get their tariff rate on those DC units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't speak to where that process is, but certainly, we support them having a tariff, and we want to work with them on that, because we've definitely had to bring in like additional parking metering requirements at their on-street chargers in Vancouver to make sure that, again, we're able to manage transportation in that public space where they're not allowed to charge.
The answer from the Utilities Commission is they're waiting for Hydro. So maybe we can work on that.
Maybe we'll have to give them a nudge then.
I'm wondering if it's a possibility for you folks to do like they've done with COVID and the incubators, to put out a call for people to come up with new processors or new technologies to be able to charge cars at the lamppost in particular, and to see if our universities and various other people can put their heads together to come up with something that's less expensive, that shares, say, a whole block, and so you're not having to put in all these transformers, and sort of reduce the cost on the whole infrastructure side of things.
That's actually a really excellent idea. We hadn't considered a public call for something like that. We have sort of talked to some sort of smaller technology providers that exist elsewhere. There's a company called Ubitricity, for example, that exists. They're doing a lot of London's light pole charging, and they're working with the City of New York now. We are looking at sort of these smaller operations. Certainly Plugzio is a homegrown level 1 provider here, but I would definitely like that public call idea might be an interesting one. We are going to be going to more public engagement generally, but hadn't really considered something specific like that. So thanks for that, Don.
We have 60 seconds. I think one last question, comment from Kelly.
Yeah, so we all know that the Hastings Street DC charger is blocked off. Do you have any idea how long that'll be unavailable for?
Not exactly, but I think we're looking at reopening it now. I had a fairly lengthy call about it on Thursday to try and figure out how to get that parking reopened. Parks Board is nervous about having people be able to drive in easily, but
is that what you saw as well?
That's actually one more than I counted, but it sounds good. Yeah. People coming and going, but 64, nice.
Bruce? Sharp?
Yes?
I just got thrown out of the Ian Neville room.
Yeah, we got cut out of Ian Neville's room. That was ridiculous. We want to get back to Ian Neville.
I'm in the main room now. Maybe I'll just finish answering Kelly's question because I think it pertains to everybody. So Kelly Carmichael was asking me about the Empire Fields charging station and the fact that it's closed off right now because of the COVID-19 restrictions. I can speak a little more slowly now that there's not a ticking clock, actually. So that park is closed because we're trying to, prevent people from setting up their own little mini soccer leagues and not socially distancing. And so they've limited parking there. However, we are trying to work on a plan to effectively blockade all the other parking and just have the EV charging open. It's going to cost us some money by the looks of it to do that, but it does seem like people are interested in helping it out, and we have made it clear that it is essential infrastructure. That park is not going to be anywhere near the top of the list for what will open as we start relaxing things. So I'd like to see that charger up and running. I can say that we're working on it.
Neville, thanks for that. Neville, you said you needed to leave pretty close to noon. Do you have time to stay, or do you need to leave?
I do have to hop off the call now, but I did send my email around to folks in my breakout room, and so they're certainly welcome to email me that way. And maybe Ron, and then you can distribute it to folks if they want to have this feedback. And yeah, certainly folks are welcome to reach out to me separately, and I'm happy to take that. I really appreciate all the feedback I've got today.
We want to thank you for coming out and talking to us. It was really informative. You had a lot of people in there just chatting away like crazy. So I want to say thanks once again for coming out. And we're going to start the breakout rooms up again. And they'll just be the same title. You can go to Ian Neville's breakout room. He won't be there, of course, but I'm sure that you had lots of things that you wanted to talk to, and you could still exchange ideas. So thank you, Ian. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone for having me. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That was great. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry we closed down the room somewhat unexpectedly. We knew that Ian had to go, and I got the word that it was time to shut the room, so I did that. Anyway, I'll start them again. As Ron says, they'll have the same names as before. And I guess you're going to end up in the same room you were in before. Once again, if you go to the bottom of your screen and click the breakout room button, you should see a list of rooms and have the ability to join a different room if that's what you want to do. If not, come back to the main room and I'll help you out here. All right, I'm going to open all the rooms again. You should see invitations popping up.
So is anybody actually here in this breakout room?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I am.
No, I'm not here. I left.
Could I make a comment, just an observation from following that Ian's presentation? One of the things that was on his slides was you referenced it was the one on, if people recall, it was the one on the timelines, and he was talking about like engagement with outside of the city, within the city, and so one of the questions I just want to throw out there for people's comment is, and that I think we might want to talk to Ian is, how can we in the EV community, what role can we play to help them, especially when it gets into them dialoguing, reaching out to the general public on these things? Because I think there's maybe some challenges there, because a lot of the people from that group are not going to understand a lot of the issues. And so I make that comment just to maybe provoke some discussion, because I think it might be something that we could play a role in and help the city out which would help us out. Over to you.
I think one of the biggest friction points is parking restrictions. If somebody sees a block of road that's marked EV only, that just sets us up for a fight. So one of the things I think about for ubiquitous charging, where it is in every lamppost or something like that, like my dream is that all parking is electrified. And I don't know how you get there without pissing off a bunch of people before they've even considered an electric car.
See, one of the challenges that we've got right now is that the City of New Westminster put in a pilot program for electric vehicles charging. And it was a brilliant idea because they switched the lamp posts over from what they had in terms of illumination to LEDs, and that gave them an overhead space, free space, electricity that wasn't being consumed. And I think Kelly Carmichael's down here. He's the expert on this because he was definitely involved in that. So I'd love him to speak about the City of New Westminster, what they did, how they were able to use the power from all of those lamp posts to charge some electric cars. But the one thing I think that they might have done wrong at the City of New Westminster is they didn't make it restrictive parking for EV only. And what was happening is some of those spaces were iced. Over to Kelly Carmichael.
Yeah, so I actually came up with that entire project based on a Viva meeting where City of Vancouver had came and talked about their initial curbside charging, and I said, why don't you put level 2s on the lamppost? And I said, we don't know if they can do that. And so I said, well, let me go try. And so I went through and found out that yes, we could get to 40 volts at the lampposts. Moving to LED lights freed up enough ampacity on the circuits that we could install some level 2s. The difficulties that happened technically wise is that there's a breaker panel, and then those circuits go about 2 blocks in each direction, and you definitely cannot put a 15 amp plug on every light post using the existing infrastructure. You would have to definitely add pull additional circuits to make that happen. And so that's not going to happen with existing infrastructure. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not a good decision to go to the planners and say, you should tell people to put in bigger conduit so that they could install proper light posts with LED and EV charging in the future for future builds. But that didn't happen in New West. On the policy side, the big issues were that the City of New Westminster does not have a bylaw that allows them to add EV-only reserve parking on the street, so they can't actually reserve it for EV. So we told them not to reserve it and just put the signs down, hoping that people would mostly pay attention to the signs on the pavement markings. The store owners complained that there was now reserved parking in front of their business that their customers can't use. And so the city went back and installed really ridiculous signs that said, these are not reserved for EV. And that gave a totally opposite impression to people, because I feel that people that park in New Westminster may now go to Vancouver and ignore EV only charging spots because it's like, oh, it's like New Westminster. You can park in front of it. It's not actually reserved. The other issue that the city had was they wanted all the cords to not hang low enough that someone could trip on it. So we had to lift the cords up quite high. And so that does add a mobility challenge for people in a wheelchair to grab the cord and plug it into their car.
Well, now I'm depressed.
It's not technical, but it's with the car share programs. Ian mentioned that people were preferring the electric vehicle over the ICE vehicle. Is there an advantage financially? Do they get charged less for using the EV because they're not having to roll in the gas price to the members' charge?
I can only speculate. I don't actually know the answer to that, but I've used car shares a lot, and it wouldn't surprise me if people were trying out their first electric car, if they were considering one and they go, okay, there's a Kona and this is something I was considering. So it's an interesting way to get a test drive.
And Simon, you mentioned, I think, an acronym. Was it FAF? F-A-F?
FAF. FAF. That's a British term for. It's not an acronym. It just means like a chore. Like whenever with all the charging apps, you have to sign in and create an email and scan a QR code and all that faff. And so that's what that is. It's just a bothersome task that we could do without. And so I wanted to make sure that if we have a Vancouver electrification mechanism, that it's not a pain in the ass. It's a shorter way of saying a pain in the ass.
You know, it's a really interesting comment and Simon was right on the money there. He talked about, we don't want to give away free charging, so we have to monetize, or we have to get people to pay for the charging. But everybody forgets the cost of the infrastructure that's necessary to make people pay for something. Now, the people that produce the product and the guys that do, I'm trying to remember this plug thing that the local guy does.
Plugzio.
The Plugzio people made their initial money by designing the software that runs Vancouver's metering system. So he sent an email out just a little while ago talking about the huge decline in the use of parking in Vancouver over the COVID-19 things just in mid-March. And parking revenue in Vancouver has dropped off a cliff. And that's one of the reasons why they've sort of made parking in Vancouver free, and they've cut down the enforcement because nobody's parking in Vancouver. So when you start talking about the FAF or the stuff that's necessary to actually charge your car, the people that sell this product are going to try and convince the city of Vancouver that they absolutely have to charge for charging, because this is how they make their money by supplying the back end. So this was a very good point that you made to make Ian think about the fact that, hey, you can either give away the charging or you can charge for the charging. A best example is there's a community up in the interior of British Columbia that had 2 charge point chargers put in. One of them got vandalized almost immediately. This is Rossland, BC. But the other one, they were presented with a $2,000 annual bill to be on the network. They finally decided they were just going to make it free because that saved them $2,000 a year. And they figured what they were going to lose in cost of electricity was negligible compared to the $2,000. So when do you make charging free? The problem that the City of Vancouver had with Mainland Street, where they had free charging that you could use. What they had is one individual whose wife would show up in a smart car every morning, plug in the car, leave it there for 8 hours when she was fully charged in 2 or 3 hours. Finally, they put up a sign that said 3-hour charging. Then they put up a sign that said, now you're going to pay for the meter use plus the charging. So it's $3.50 an hour to use that charger on Mainland, as opposed to $2 to use any of the parking meters on the street. And now the chargers at Mainland Street are available to people because people are going and parking there only as long as they have to. So we can't give away free charging for the same reason that Ian said. We have to add a cost to it, because if you give me something for free, I'm going to eat as much as I can.
Yes, but if it doesn't take away from someone else. So the reason that was a problem is because there was a limited number of charging spots. And so if you had a bazillion charging spots and somebody plugged in, once their car is topped up, then they're not going to be costing any more to the city for electricity because their car won't be drawing any more current. And the fact that they're just parked there for the rest of the day is just a regular parking problem. But I get that it's a really difficult balance to get right.
So it's not costing the city, but the city then gets the complaints that this station is unavailable. And that's where he's saying actual fistfights have happened, and I've seen some of those.
Right, but that's because of a limited number of chargers. If there were hundreds of chargers,
overstay.
But if every slot could, or one, if you do it like block heaters. So block heaters in the north of the northern parts of BC, where you have a post with a socket on it that covers 4 parking spots, and you could plug your car into there. There was one in Alberta that I went to at Drumheller, where they had converted a block heater with 4 regular 110 outlets into a welder's socket. So they put a 240 volt welder's socket. Check out my PlugShare photos. And that works because you're not competing with anyone. If you had just a 240 volt on for every 4 spots, then I think the conflict would be lower.
At a cost of $10,000 for that?
No, I mean that's what I mean. Like if
middle of a parking lot.
If you're not trying to charge for the electricity, so you're not putting in a charge point meter, which does, like you say, cost $10,000 or $20,000, or you're not trying to put in a piece of charging infrastructure that can take credit cards or apps or has any electronics in it at all. If you're just saying that we're going to give away the electricity and we're going to put in the infrastructure for the cost of a socket, a $60 socket, plus wiring, plus, I understand it's not quite that cheap at all.
But you have to then cut up the pavement, put in conduit, and that's what I'm saying is $10,000 to put that into a parking lot that's 200 feet from the building.
Right. Okay.
It's really expensive when you try to think every parking spot should have a 240 volt outlet or a 240 outlet in the middle of 4 parking stalls in a parking lot. Because I work at BCIT and I looked at it, it was super expensive. We have 20 charging stations on campus. People are complaining all the time that there's not enough charging. And it's amazing that the people with Teslas are coming to work. They fill up with 6 kilowatt hours worth of energy and their car's full. And they're saying, but I need to charge every day because I might need to go out and do some errands before I go home, even though they have charging at home. And so we end up with the people that arrive at 7 a.m. will stay there all day long because parking doesn't enforce it, because it's research stuff and not part of their parking requirements yet. So there is this whole thing that you might not have seen yet that is going to happen.
Is that an early Tesla user thing? Because I think when you first get an electric car, you think I've always got to charge it all the time. But then once you've had it for maybe 6 months or a year, you understand you can actually let it go down to a quarter full and it's not really going to impact you.
It's just a cheap thing. People want to be cheap. I don't know why.
Well, I expect to pay for what I use. So, I expect to pay for the electricity at a charging station. I don't expect some taxpayer or somebody else to pay for the charging facilities as well as for the energy. So I pay 21 cents a minute at the fast charger not too far from here. That's still pretty cheap. So I think we should not be penny pinching when we should be supporting the people that put in these charging stations so they can recover their capital costs, their maintenance costs, as well as their operating costs.
Something like
sorry, I don't want to seem like I'm trying to get a free lunch. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Well, you do.
Yeah, I apologize. That's not what I mean. I'm trying to make it so that the capital costs aren't a barrier to entry. The dollar an hour for 6 kilowatts over at the rec center in Riley Park is perfect. It's the right pricing and it keeps the stations moving. I just wouldn't want it so that the cost of those flow chargers is so expensive to the city that they can only put a few of them in. But no, I completely agree. You should pay for your juice.
Yeah, can I interrupt? I hate to impose, and I apologize. I was late to the meeting because I was solving an electric code issue. Could somebody do a very, very brief summary of what Ian Neville spoke to and what their plans were? Might help us all just sort of think back and say, what did he really say? And just what were the highlights in just 30 seconds or so? Thanks.
Well, basically,
boy, that's asking a lot, Don.
Yeah.
Don,
he gave a quick summary of what the city was doing and the challenges and whatnot that they have. Looked at different modes of charging. The street side, the lamp post charging is a possibility. The difficulties they're having with that. The idea of using empty schools, weekends and evenings, churches, which are mostly empty most of the year, 6 days a week, most of them are empty, and even on that day, they're empty 23 hours of a 24-hour day on Sunday. They use those as local community spots for charging, to put in charging stations. Yeah, I thought he gave quite a good presentation, and their ambition is to get half of the vehicles, half of the miles driven in Vancouver on zero-emission vehicles, or essentially EVs. So,
by 2030.
By 2030, okay, thanks. If I could add something or ask something slightly separate with respect to charging, is what is a possibility? And I think some of this stuff can probably solve with software. Instead of having the software in each charger, is just to be able to identify every vehicle that comes in, plugs in by their VIN number, and charge them by that. You know, have them set up through ICBC when they're registering the vehicles, tied in with the ICBC records as to which the vehicles are. So when they charge, you know who's charging, and you charge them for whatever the, you know, whether it's by the hour or whatever it is that they do. You could have a warning system set up to say your car is already fully charged, or 80%, you can't use the charger, move on with a little beep or something like that, without having too fancy an infrastructure. This is part of the idea of my idea of going out for a call to come up with ideas to put in cost-effective charging stations that have greater accessibility.
Don, Tesla's been doing that from the beginning. All Teslas are charged based on their VIN number. Tesla does the back-end charging. You give Tesla your credit card. You go plug in. There's a brief moment while the car is analyzed by the Tesla charging system, and you get charged automatically. So Tesla owners don't tap anything. They just go plug in and they're done.
Yeah.
And the Compass card could be used as well, because it's a City of Vancouver thing or TransLink thing, and that it was one discussed as universal. But the question I had was, did Ian Neville mention anything about extension cords over sidewalks?
Yes, he did. He talked about Seattle, which has allowed that extension cords over sidewalks, and they're going to put in legislation in City of Vancouver that allows extension cords over sidewalks. However, they're going to limit the size of that extension cord to ½ an inch, so that's probably going to not allow you to put 240 extension cords across the sidewalk.
The question that I didn't get to ask was parking your car in the opposite direction for Teslas, because the charging thing sticks out onto the roadside. I don't know if anybody worries about that getting clipped.
Yeah, well, that's a real problem when they designed that car, and I don't know why they designed it that way. I think the only reason that they designed it with the charging cord on the driver's side of the car is because the driver could then walk back and plug in the car and see what's going on. But you're absolutely right. That's not how we park in Canada.
But in Europe, it's on the same side. So in the UK market, it's on the same side. So for right-hand drive cars, it's actually on the passenger side.
Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong.
It would be nice if it was on both sides, because then also when you park in parkades, you're not running the cord all the way down to the far end and around other cars, and it'd be easier and a lot cheaper if you had either say on the front and on the back.
Just CCS on one side, Tesla DC on the other.
Yeah.
Back to the question about identifying cars. My understanding is you can't do it through level 2 or level 1. It's only DC fast charging that sends the VIN number to the charger.
And only CCS, not Chatham.
Yeah,
it works with Tesla too.
If you go to the train station on National and Main Street, the charge stations there have video cameras in them that read your license plate and automatically bill you, which is an ideal solution to put a video camera in the charge station and use that to identify that and identify theft and automatic billing, etc.
That's awesome. Where is that?
Great ideas.
Down to the bus station, the old train station, just off Terminal Avenue, I guess it is.
Okay.
National.
Neat.
They're expensive though. They're big units, and putting a camera in is just one little bit more of electronics. The electronics don't cost all that much inside of a charge station when you put in billing and all that, maybe a couple $100 altogether. It's a difference in a mature market. Right now, it's early market pricing, but those will come down.
So you're talking First in Main, are you? Where just across from Science World?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
It's still a current train station, by the way.
Yes, yeah, train, bus.
The rail uses it, yeah.
Yeah, it's they're on the north end of the parking lot in front of the train station. There's a few of them there. I saw them about a year ago. I don't know what's there now. But it was a good idea. I thought putting a camera in would be nice, but we're trying to keep the cost of the charge stations down and what's driving it. And usually the cost of them is really related to the wiring and, you know, things like street lights. I looked into it about 10, 12 years ago and found that about 80%, I think, of these streetlights in Vancouver are owned by the city. There's a few owned by the province and a few owned by the BC Hydro. They used to have, I think, 8 to 10 streetlights on one circuit, and they would have 4 circuits tied together onto one solar cell to turn them on and off. And the only way to do it would be able to move the solar cell to each individual string of 10 or 12 per circuit on the first lamppost and be able to switch all the lights on and all the chargers off from that first one, but only be able to put one charge station for a block, basically per 10 or so light lampposts. That's all the power was there. Otherwise, you have to bring in bigger wire. And if you're going further distances, the wire has to be bigger and the more copper, more expense. And then the conduit size, if you put more current in, has to be larger. So that means digging it all up. As soon as you start getting a digger in there, tearing up concrete, it gets really expensive. So, I mean, even Manitoba considered the block heaters, they're limited to 500 watts. Your level one's 1.5 kilowatts, normally up to 2. At a quarter speed on level 1, you're not going to help much. So it's electrical infrastructure, which is a limiting factor. And the only way around that is to have managed systems that share and have them loads monitored so you can use power that's available when your church slot example, if the rest of the circuits are not being used, then you can provide more power. And that technology has been developed by other Viva members. A lot of this technology, even the lamppost first started by Greg, who was a Viva member 10 years ago. He moved to Germany and developed the system they have in Europe now. So there's a lot of that innovation has happened right here out of this group.
Interesting.
So just to jump in here for a second, get back to Kelly Carmichael in the city of New Westminster. Apparently they're doing this in Los Angeles right now. You want to comment on that, Kelly, please?
Yeah, so when I did it, I approached At Energy and said, do you want to be a partner in this project? And they said, absolutely not, because it will never work. I got into the project and bought equipment from them and did the project without them as a partner. Had them build some additional some harnesses for the cable management, and installed that in New Westminster, and that turned out really fabulous. Ad Energy went off to Los Angeles after my project was successful, and has rolled out a couple hundred chargers across Los Angeles with the Department of Streetlights, or whatever they call it in Los Angeles. So it really did take my work and commercialized it, which I'm really happy that they did.
So the point is, it's been proven that you could take 10 street lights and put a charger on 10 street lights without having to dig up any of the pavement, without having to do anything elaborate. All you need is a flow charger with the appropriate cable, and away you go.
Yep. In Los Angeles, the biggest issue they had was a lot of their street lights were multi-use poles. So it's like a wooden pole with different utilities on it. And if you start installing these charging stations on those types of poles, it makes it difficult for people to be able to climb up the pole with the climbing harnesses and to work on their individual different services. And so they'd have tried to avoid those types of setups.
The bottom line is, if the city of Vancouver wanted to start doing this, the city of New Westminster has installed it and proves that it works. Los Angeles has installed it and proves that it works. So you could take 10 streetlights in the city of Vancouver, and on the 10th streetlight, you could install a charging station without having huge expense.
Yeah.
So Kelly, for New Westminster, do you need a flow RFID, a flow account, in order to get started?
We have two sites that are flow that you have to tap your card at, and we have 2 sites that use Clipper Creek stations that you don't need to, or 3 sites that use Clipper Creeks. and those you don't need to tap anything. And as of last week, we have 2 Flow DC fast chargers that have been installed or now operational in Queen's Park.
Oh, good, because that's right beside my daughter. Thanks.
Just on a side thing here, something that Ian mentioned in his presentation post-COVID is like talked a little bit about car sales and this general state of the economy. And I can't imagine us coming back very quickly in a high level of car sales of any kind, be it EVs or anything else. But I find it interesting that some places in Europe, and Paris is one, there's 3 or 4 other cities in Spain and a couple of Scandinavian countries that are using this COVID opportunity to shut down lanes and convert them to bicycle lanes, even going out into the burbs of Paris. So when things come back, they're using this as an opportunity to take out some of the regular infrastructure and reduce the amount of vehicles using the streets and encouraging more people to use electric bikes and bicycles and whatnot in lieu of. And I think it's kind of gutsy for them to try and do that sort of thing. But I think one of the things that we have to be conscious of in the EV clubs and pushing this stuff is I think our cities, our province, even our federal government, the whole works of them are going through so much money at this point in time, even though it's almost essentially free money, and that the interest rate the Bank of Canada is charging is next to 0.25% or something, I think, we still are going to have a very slow economy. There's going to be a lot of objections and people fighting for the bit of money that is available ongoing. And so I think it's, as several people have said, they don't want to have backlash against EVs. And I think we have to be particularly careful in what we promote so that there isn't a backlash and that we show that we're trying to come up with a positive solution as opposed to serving ourselves.
Yeah, you couldn't agree with you more. But the other thing we have to always realize is there will always be 5% of the population that will be curmudgeons.
Oh yeah.
They will always do backlash. And
Yeah.
what you want to do is reward the people that don't do the backlash. Now, I think it's well within the realm of possibility that driving cars in Stanley Park will disappear after COVID-19 is over. It's well within the realm of possibility that some of the street closures that Vancouver has instituted will just become institutional after the COVID-19 is over. And no cars in Stanley Park isn't such a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's an opportunity to look things. Something I would like to see that our cities do, and Vancouver's the best one in the Lower Mainland, is for the province or the city to publish daily what the pollution levels are. And so that we can start to see things going downhill again once the economy comes back. So people recognize there's a consequence to our lifestyle and do more stuff on, and they're doing studies on it now, but there's very little publicity about just how much things have fallen. And remind people that, hey, you can get out at night and see the stars clearer than we've seen them for 50 years or 70 years to try and build support for trying to live in a cleaner environment.
You know, one of the people that isn't at this meeting today, who was there last week, is busy driving for Uber Eats today. And what he does is he drives his Tesla Model 3 and delivers food to people, and he gets paid money to do that. And why he's driving a Tesla Model 3 is it costs him less than $3 100 kilometers, whereas driving something else, even a cheap car, would cost him close to $10 100 kilometers.
Yeah.
So one of the neat things that he's doing by driving that electric car and delivering things to people today is people are saying to him, how come you're using this car to do this? And he says, well, it's so infinitesimally cheap. And then all of a sudden, these people's minds are starting to go around the fact that, wait a minute, I'm wasting a ton of money on operating costs on driving a gasoline-powered car. So it's a great idea that he's using one of these electrically powered cars to do this today. And I think this is an area we have to start focusing on. We have to start focusing and finding people and saying to them, yes, I drive an electric car, but I drive an electric car because it's such a much better experience. And look what it's doing for the environment. I'm out there driving my electric car. I haven't changed the pollution levels in Vancouver at all from the fact that no one else was driving. I haven't added to the pollution.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask Don to talk to us a bit? One of the things that Ian had brought up was the concepts of level 1 charging or socket-based EV chargers versus cord based. So like North America, all level 2s have a cord on them, and instead of having a cord, having a socket like Europe. I know that there was some issues around that for North America, and do you know the dynamics of why we got stuck with cord based level 2s only?
I don't know the specific reasons why it was chosen, just the fact that it was. I like the European solution better in so many ways because it deals with theft issues. I think having two cords, I don't know if it allowed you to lock one end or the other so that you couldn't be disconnecting during a charge. That could be a potential issue. It should be able to operate either way, technically, I think. So I know when I bought my car in 2014, the BMW had one of those extension cables offered as an accessory to it. And I thought, oh, that'll give me an extension cord for it, although I didn't opt for it. I'm not sure just why they did it in the end, or the whole history of that. I didn't pay a lot of attention at that time, but great idea in many ways. It does cut the cost. Or move the cost, let's say, to the infrastructure from the car owner. It seems to work in Europe.
So Don, can you explain what's the difference in Europe compared to what we have here? When I was in Europe a couple of years ago, I didn't notice a difference, but obviously I missed something.
A lot of the chargers in Europe don't have a cord on them. They have a socket.
Okay.
So you bring your own cord, plug it into both ends, into the car and into the EVSE. And that way the lamp posts that they put these on just have a socket. And the charge station is inside the lamp post. All the smarts. One of the Viva members developed the software for that.
Okay.
I know when I was installing my system at my curbside, the city wanted me to just put a plug, but I wanted the cable. And I have kind of a standard level 2 charger with a cable. And the reason I wanted the cable is I didn't want to have to just wrap up the cable and tuck it in the back of my car every time. It's so simple just to plug that cable in. It's got a little cable retractor and whoop, it's back up. And, every time I plug in, I would have to wrap the thing up and throw it in the trunk of my car. So there is more theft. There's a little thing that somebody could cut or whatever, but I haven't had a problem yet. But I opted for the cable myself. I'm glad I did. Until somebody cuts it, I guess I'm glad I did. But yeah, it kind of works both ways, I guess.
Yeah, the cables are expensive to replace, for sure.
I also want to say my car, I bought a Kona 2019. It came with a EVSE cable, as I think most of them do. My car came with only a 120 plug at the one end and the J1772 at the other. But I know the Nissan Leaf, which I was considering, came with a cable that you could plug into a stove plug, some kind of 220 plug. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then it had just a little adapter that made it a regular U-ground 110. So it was a 110 or 220 cable.
Yeah, what actually happened is people that bought the early Nissan Leafs could send their Nissan Leaf 120 volt charger away to somebody in the United States, who would then convert it to a 120 240 volt charger that would run at 16 amps, would run on a 240 volt 20 amp service. So that somebody did that. Anybody who buys a Tesla used to get the cable that came with the Tesla with different ends that would fit on it. Now what they get is they get the Tesla plug with an end that allows them to plug in at 120 volt, and they can buy for $45 an end that plugs into a dryer socket, a stove socket. Donovan Whistler, who's on this call, I think has about something in the neighborhood of 8 different adapters for his Tesla Model 3 charging cord, and he can plug into anything just about anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so maybe I can comment. Tesla, there's 8 different plugs that can be bought. I think the Audi e-tron has a similar thing, and it comes with like a NEMA 515, and I forget the other one is a 240 volt. Can't remember which connector. I think it's the same one that the new Nissan Leafs use. Yeah, so virtually all the cars, though, they just have your NEMA 515 standard household connector.
Yeah, so those level ones that come with the car, if you try to replace them, like the Nissan Leaf one was over $1,000 for the level one. So a standard J1772 cord set you can buy for about $300. So the cost to whoever loses their level one versus the level two cord, it's actually like 4 times more expensive if someone loses the level one than a level two cord getting cut. So we're not really saving a whole lot by moving the risk onto the driver and having them use level one on the curbside. So that's one thing I would point out.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Better hold on to my level one plug that I use daily at the house. That's why I leave it at home and never take it with me. I'm wondering if any of you folks have had any experience with Dryer Buddy, or if there's anything. I understand they're not CSA approved, and if there's anything in Canada that equates to that. And here's another opportunity for some companies and little firms in Canada to start making Dryer Buddy type things that you can share an existing plug.
Well, I've heard of somebody that has a two-way switch that he installs. And what you have is you have one circuit that goes to the dryer and the other circuit that goes to the socket that you plug your EV into. And there's an actual switch that allows you to either run the dryer or run the EV. There's no way you can run both at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's a standard installation for some electricians.
That's what I have at home. So that's what I installed when I put my curbside charger in. It's just a simple, well, it's not that simple. I think it costs $700 just for the switch, but it's not a Dryer Buddy or any fancy sharing thing. It's a simple switch. It sits by the dryer. So I just click it over when I'm using the dryer. I just throw the switch one way, and it's a double throw switch so it doesn't spark or something like that. And then when I want to charge the car, I just have to flip it over the other way, and it sends the same power. So I didn't have to put extra breakers in my panel or anything.
Yeah.
And I'm going to reply to that, because when you do that, your dryer is rated at 25% demand factor. Your charge station is rated at 100%. So you really have to redo your load calculation to see whether or not your overall service will accommodate it. And many people skip that.
Right. Well, I had it done by the electricians, and they did actually up my dryer used to be on a 30 amp breaker, and we did replace that 30 amp breaker in the box with a 40 amp breaker, because it runs the chargers of 40 amp, it draws 80% of 40 amps or something like that. So it's rated at 40. So now the dryer is overrated on the breaker, but I think I'm good. Yeah.
That's still not the code. It's not the circuit breaker size. It's the load calculation, which adds up all the breakers in your circuit, or according to a general formula, to determine whether or not you need to go to a higher amperage panel. That's quite different. Electrician didn't do that. He didn't follow the rules.
Yes, I believe he did do that. And if I wanted to put in a separate 40 amp circuit for the plug, I would have had to upgrade the service, which is only 100 amp for the house. Yep. But because we shared this and we're never drawing the loads twice, I was within on the maximum load for that dryer. I think that was all done, yeah.
Not the maximum load for the dryer, but the dryer is only rated at 25%. So it only assumes on the panel that's drawing at 7.5 amps. So the EVSE is drawing at 32 amps.
Right. Right.
So that's quite a difference not everybody understands. In fact, 100 amp is probably fine, because your maximum load on most houses is less than 7 or 8 kilowatts.
Yeah.
There's still up to 24 kilowatts your panel, so there's still usually lots of space available.
Is that right? I'll have to try and do that on mine, Don, because I've only got a 100 amp panel too, and it's pretty plugged. But I just replaced my hot water tank, electric one, with a heat pump hot water tank, and it's saving me about 7 kilowatt hours a day.
Don, Scott, how do you heat your food? How do you cook your food?
With everything's electric in my house.
Okay, so do you cook your oven at night?
Very rarely.
Okay, so
we do once in a while, yeah.
You got a 40 or a 50 amp breaker there that isn't being used at night.
That's correct.
so you can charge your car overnight.
It's not the panel. You have to understand, it's not how many breakers you have. You got to have, 100 breakers on your panel if it met the load calculation.
Well, I think it's time that we brought this to an end, almost to an end.
Almost, well, for many it will be, yeah.
Yeah, hey, Bruce Sharp, I want to thank you so much for being the host and managing everything for us. That's a full-time job in itself.